thank you to Imperial College for hosting me, and for so many of you for being here. It's really an honor to be able to address such an esteemed and large audience of people for the Vincent Briscoe Lecture and follow in such a, frankly, quite terrifying alumni of former speakers. So I'm here to talk to you about the darknet and my recent book. But I want to start by taking us back to 1844 and a fascinating story in the Times newspaper. No man's correspondence is safe. No man's confidence can be deemed secret. The secrets of no man or no individual can be guaranteed from reaching the ear of a cabinet minister. Britain was in the middle of a scandal, a crisis, because the Home Secretary at the time had determined that an exiled Italian, the leader of this group called the Young Italians, needed to have his letters secretly opened. And when Mazzini, which was his name, petitioned Parliament, the Home Secretary replied that it was not for the public good to pry or inquire into the particular causes which called for the exercise thereof. I rather wish the Home Secretary would speak rather like that today. It's nice, isn't it? He therefore would not consent to enter into any further explanation of the matter. And I think we're faced with a rather similar set of challenges today. New technology, new ways of communicating with each other. At the time, letters through the post office was rather new, disrupting the methods and the laws that we have established and built for a different era. And today I'm going to talk about where I think that might be heading. Now, the darknet, my book here, is a series of portraits, really. It's not a polemical work. All I was trying to do over the course of a year was to, as you've heard, immerse myself in a number of underexplored, often rather shocking subcultures that exist online. And the reason I did this was because I, like many of you, have probably noted that over the last couple of years in particular, we hear this sort of flash story of something bad happening on the internet somewhere. Whether that's internet trolling, which today appears to be in the news almost every day, or neo-Nazis using the net, or Islamic State and their so-called social media marketing genius, or perhaps it's drugs markets, child abuse images being shared and distributed. What I noticed about all of these stories was that very rarely did we get to see them in any more than just a glimpse, just a short newspaper story or an article. So I determined that I would immerse myself for 1 year in some of these underexplored subcultures. That's why I look so exhausted and poor man's Russell Brand, I've been called before. But crucially, I also determined to meet the individuals that were part of these subcultures, these communities, because after all, they may be taking place online, but there are, of course, people behind the screen as well. And so I spent my time in a strangely joined an internet trolling community. I actually became a moderator of an internet trolling group. I spent an awful lot of time in pubs up and down the country with neo-Nazis, pushing their propaganda out via social media. I visited the Tor hidden service part of the internet, the encrypted net, which I'm going to talk a bit about today. I even managed to visit and almost take part in a live sex show in a messy bedroom up in Leeds, as people use the net to perform sexually explicit acts for strangers, for money. And through all of these, I suppose I was trying to understand what are the extremities to which people will go under the conditions of anonymity, real or perceived anonymity, indeed of pseudonymity. And that's what I tried to find out. But what I want to do today is go a little bit beyond that and say something about where I think this might be going for security, because after all, this is a security lecture. And I haven't really talked about that so much yet, and I didn't really mention it in the book. So what I'm going to try to do is take a couple of the stories from the book, project forward into how I think it's going to evolve, and what I think it means for our intelligence and security services in particular. Now, I'm going to ask you to cast your mind back again, not quite as far as 1844, but to the early 1990s. Cyberspace at the time, as it was called, was an increasing headache for law enforcement agencies, particularly in the United States, whether it was hackers, gamers, people using bulletin board systems to share illegal images of children. It was becoming a problem. And so the FBI decided to launch something of a nationwide crackdown on these hackers called Operation Sun Devil. Some of you may be familiar with this. They were also growing rather concerned with the growth of readily available, powerful encryption software, which would allow people to communicate with each other without third parties being able to see what was being said. Now, as a result of this sort of crackdown, something like the opposite of what the American government hoped would happen, rather predictably, I think, took place. Firstly, the software programmer, Phil Zimmerman, furious about what the US government was trying to do with a particular piece of legislation on communications data, decided to rush through the production and then the open sourcing of something called Pretty Good Privacy Encryption, which was an open source, very powerful type of encryption for public use. Then the cypherpunks, a group of radical libertarian Californians, set up an emailing list, and they decided that they would use this to try to either create or share various forms of, again, encryption and anonymous web browsing to a larger audience. The cypherpunks, in the end, on their emailing list, which lasted between 93 and about 99, 2001, pretty much predicted or helped to develop almost every single type of encryption that is now publicly used. Julian Assange, interestingly enough, in about 1995 started posting in the cypherpunks mailing list under the name Prof. Anyone who was interested in WikiLeaks at the beginning and wanted to know a little bit more about Julian Assange's beliefs would have done well to have read some of his posts. And then, of course, the Electronic Freedom Frontier was set up in response to this perceived crackdown. In short, there was something of a counter-reaction among citizens and activists who believed, rightly or wrongly, that government had overreached, had stepped into a new space that was not really meant for them. And as a result, the counter-reaction was a huge increase in interest in how to stay private online, how to stay anonymous online, how to evade government detection online. Any of that sound familiar? This was known as the crypto wars. And I think what we're seeing now is a second crypto war after Edward Snowden. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means. I'll just grab a tiny bit of water. Now, I'm going to illustrate where I think this is going with the case of the Silk Road Drugs website and why this matters. So, the Silk Road Drugs website, I won't ask if anyone's been on it, don't worry, you don't need to admit anything, it's being filmed, is an encrypted Tor hidden service. So Tor is a type of, I'll give you the quick account, Tor is a type of anonymous browser that allows its users to browse the net in a way that masks the IP address, which makes it very difficult for anybody to know, anyone who's visiting a site, it's very difficult to know where they're actually located. It was originally invented, much like the internet, in fact, by the US government, and is much beloved by civil rights activists because it's such a powerful tool particularly in autocratic or dictatorial regimes around the world. Tor Hidden Services uses the same non-standard protocol in the way that it masks a certain number of websites as well. So when you use the browser Tor, it's your key into what sometimes is, I think, mistakenly called the darknet. More accurately is called Tor Hidden Services. It's a series of websites which you access using Tor, which use this same protocol to mask the location of the server of where those websites are hosted. There's something like, it's been estimated 30 or 40, but it's very hard to know, 1,000 of these Tor Hidden Service websites in operation. It's something of a Wild West as far as that goes on the internet. And there you will find the WikiLeaks cache. You will find the New Yorker whistleblowing strongbox. You will also find a whole array of terrible blogs and sites that people have just set up. It's rather like the internet in the early 90s. You will also find illegal pornography, and you will find approximately 30 functioning anonymous marketplaces where, with a few exceptions, anything and everything is bought and sold. One of those is the Silk Road. The Silk Road was actually shut down last year, but reopened again fairly soon afterwards, called the Silk Road 2.0. Better, stronger, more secure than the original. Now, this is the thing about the Silk Road. When you first enter the Silk Road, the thing that strikes you is the unbelievable array of choice of product. You have never seen so many narcotics in your life. Silk Road is technically an anonymous marketplace, meaning anything can be bought and sold, but drugs, of course, are the sort of standard fare there. Interestingly enough, in April, the top-selling item on the Silk Road was a fake £20 Tesco voucher, going for about £8. Apparently, according to those in the know, it worked rather well. Drugs are the main product on offer there, and the Silk Road looks like Amazon or eBay. And let me explain why that's important. There are something like 15,000 different products on offer on the Silk Road. Every drug imaginable. Each one with, as on eBay, a picture, a description, a price, description of the vendor, and crucially enough, an average score out of 5. User reviews. Everyone who goes onto the Silk Road is obligated, once they have purchased and consumed their product, to review said product. Review said product accurately and objectively. How good was the purity? How good was the value for money? How good was the stealth? Did it arrive when the vendor said it was going to arrive? And then you give it a score out of 5. This, of course, is what we all do when we're shopping online. It's the way that we make decisions between an almost infinite array of products that are now presented before us. Now, what this really does is creates a functioning marketplace. The introduction of competition and choice. You have 900 vendors on the Silk Road to go to and to choose between. And how do you decide? You decide in the same way that everybody decides faced with such choice. You read through the reviews, and that is what people do. And as a result, you won't be surprised to learn that these drug dealers are incredibly attentive. They are incredibly polite. You, the customer, are king, naturally enough. They will offer you free package and delivery on your first order to build up a bit of loyalty. If you don't like your product, let me know. I'll send you another one. So I got in touch with one of them. Drugs Heaven was his, or indeed her, name. I sent them an email on the internal system. Hello, I'm new here. I would like to inquire about buying a tiny amount of marijuana. 6 hours later or so, received a response. Hello there. My advice is that starting small is the smart thing to do. So no problem if you want to start just with 1 gram. I would too if I were you. I do hope we can do some business together. Kind regards, Drugs Heaven. This is the real secret of the Silk Road. It's not encryption and Bitcoin, which is the cryptocurrency you pay with, keeps the system going. But it's customer service that makes the Silk Road work. And the most surprising statistic of all, of everything that I saw on the Silk Road, was not the incredible array of choice, although that is truly staggering. It was the customer satisfaction scores. So I managed to scrape from the Silk Road 120,000 pieces of feedback from people that had bought products from that site. The average score out of 5, you guess what it is? It was high. It was about 4.9 out of 5. This is the trick of the Silk Road. Now, this actually creates something of a dilemma. And it was a dilemma that I hadn't really anticipated. On the one hand, the Silk Road and the other sites mean that more drugs are more available more easily to more people. I also suspect, in fact, that people will increasingly go to the Silk Road to buy wholesale in bulk and then resell retail on the streets. We could be creating an army of dealers. That's not good. And yet, for people who are going to take drugs, and history suggests people are, it is a safer, easier way of doing it because it offers a reliable and a consistent way of judging the purity of the product that you consume. When you're taking Class A drugs, and I'm not just saying this because of the audience, I really don't take drugs at all. When you're taking Class A drugs, it's extraordinarily important that you know the doses and the purity of what it is you take. And this offers a more predictable way of doing it. When people don't know that their drugs have been cut or that their dosage is changing, it can be disastrous. Equally, it potentially takes out a huge amount of the street crime that is associated with turf wars over street corners for control over local market share. It's a dilemma, and it's a dilemma that I hadn't actually been expecting to face. But it gets rather more complicated because these sites are incredibly adaptive. Because they operate on the fringes, and because they are constantly being monitored and being tried to be taken offline, they are among the most adaptive and creative types of e-commerce sites that I've ever come across. They have all sorts of fascinating escrow payment systems to try to ensure that your Bitcoin isn't going to be taken by a dealer running off with it. They share information among themselves incredibly quickly when they think there's a scammer involved in the market trying to undermine one of them. Back in October of last year, when the Silk Road originally was taken down by the FBI and the trial is ongoing, there were about 3 of these markets in operation with something like 15,000 products for sale. There are now 30 of these markets in operation, far more secure than they were before, increasingly decentralized, selling more products than ever before. And they're getting smarter all the time, driven by that incredibly powerful, that most powerful of all, that most powerful mechanism of all, which is the market and competition. For example, there is now a search engine for these sites called Grams, which allows people to search across all of the sites and look for which drugs are trending. I even saw one example of a dealer who was claiming to offer fair trade cocaine. We don't purchase our drugs from corrupt police officers or Colombian warlords. These are Peruvian farmers. And we give 10% of the profits back to local schools. it's like a marketplace. It's constantly evolving and adapting. And it's driven not just by the encryption, not just by the clever technology, but the combination of technology with demand from people. That's why the darknet is so interesting, and that's why I think it's going to continue to grow, to evolve, and why, in fact, it causes something of a headache for those who are interested in keeping society safe. Because it's not just drugs that are sold on these marketplaces. Guns are also sold on these marketplaces. Fake identification is sold on these marketplaces. Commercial hacking services are sold on these marketplaces. And indeed, it's my very strong belief that either we have already or we will soon be seeing terrorist organizations purchasing commercial hacking services from sites like this and using them. And yet the markets will continue to grow and evolve. Now, in response, the thing I noticed, I think, probably above all when I was on these marketplaces and traversing various parts of the darknet, is how, for many of them, it felt like something more than just a market for drugs. It felt like a sort of digital front line in the battle over liberty on the internet, over freedom on the internet. There is an enormous community of people who are committed to Tor hidden services, to Tor itself, and for exceptionally powerful reasons, for very good reasons indeed, that it can keep you safe from Assad, it can keep you safe from Putin, it can keep you safe from our governments too. And that's why it's so beloved of the whistleblowing community, the journalists, human rights activists, and quite rightly so. And since the Edward Snowden revelations, and this is something that I go through in some detail in my book, there has been, just as there was in 1993, 1994, the same sort of counter-reaction. The number of downloads of the Tor bundle, that's the sort of the web page that you need to go to download the browser Tor, has increased dramatically over the last 12 months or so. Use of pretty good privacy encryption has increased dramatically over the last 12 months or so. Surveys do show that people are increasingly concerned, worried about internet privacy. But I think more important than that, the number of people that are creating and open sourcing tools, especially easy to use tools, for people to stay safe and secure online. One of those examples is a distributed social network site called Twister. Has anyone ever heard of Twister in this room? Not the game on the floor. It's not entirely different when you try and understand how it actually works. Twister is it uses the same underlying technology as the cryptocurrency Bitcoin. It's a sort of distributed piece of software which each user has a version of the software on their own computer, so it acts as something of a server. And there is no centralized administrator or server that allows anybody to remove that information. And what this essentially means is that censoring the information that's on there is incredibly difficult. And so I interviewed the guy that has created Twister, Miguel Friguer. How do I pronounce his name? Miguel Freitas. And it was rather strange because back in the early 90s, Philip Zimmermann, the guy that produced and open sourced his pretty good privacy encryption, worked for 3 straight months, missed his mortgage payments, left his job to make sure that his encryption tool was ready and was out and available to use. After the riots in London and around the country in 2011, this guy realized that David Cameron had said that he might turn Twitter off. Now, the libertarian and anarchic worldview of centralized power is that if you have too much power in one place, Things have a single point of failure. They're no longer free and they're no longer open. And if David Cameron can go to Twitter or can go to Zuckerberg and demand things are removed from the internet, this is no longer really a free internet, not in the way that we would hope it to be. So when he learned about this, he spent 3 months, just like Philip Zimmermann did, working to make Twitter open source and available to all. And it's not just that. I've seen default encryption email systems being crowdsourced online so that everybody can use them. Philip Zimmermann himself is back designing a new default email encryption service called Darkmail. There is an incredible community of people dedicated to creating, building, sharing this software for other people to use. And it's a very good philosophy. It's typically honorable and quite well-intentioned. It's that we think the internet should be free. We think it should be open. They open source everything for everybody to use. They understand the power and importance of privacy, and especially to help keep people safe. Here's the problem, and it's frustrating to me as well, because what I think is often overlooked is firstly that inevitably it is these new tools and technologies that also get picked up first by people who want to hide their nefarious activities as well. And of course, governments cannot stand idly by while that happens. I'm going to read you another quote, because this was probably the most shocking quote of all in my book. I'm not going to tell you who it's by. I am using Facebook to target various nationalist-related groups, and I'm inviting every single member to become my Facebook friend. Ah, it's driving me nuts, lol. I've been doing this for 60 straight days, 3 to 4 hours a day. God, I wouldn't have imagined it was going to be this effing boring smiley face. And that was Anders Breivik in his manifesto that he spent 2 years or so piecing together from various bits of the internet. And what he was doing was creating a database of email addresses that would allow him to communicate with what he saw as this enormous white supremacist movement around Europe. And he said, there is no greater tool for the white nationalist than Facebook. This is the best way for us to share our message. And as we've seen with ISIS, these people are quick to pick up on the new technology that is available to them. So it's perhaps unsurprising that, according to academics at the University of Luxembourg, something like 40% of all the sites that are Tor hidden services are given up to either illegal pornography or drugs websites. That was not how it was meant to be, but that indeed is how it is. I did a chapter, and this creates incredible challenges. I did a chapter on child abuse images. Now, in 1990, the NSPCC believed that there were something like 7,000 images, indecent images of children in circulation. 7,000 in 1990. A lot. The FBI at the time considered that the matter was more or less under control. Well, 10 years before that, they felt it was more or less under control. We could manage this problem. 2 years ago, the National Crime Agency, or CEOP, found on one individual's computer over 2 million images and videos. It's a completely different scale of problem. And what happens on these Tor hidden services is that something like a centralized repository that everybody uploads and contributes to, that others then go and visit, download this illegal material onto their own hard drives. Then whenever the site is taken offline, they go back and upload it again because of distributed, decentralized nature of the supply. And we're talking about millions of images now. It's a completely different scale of problem. In his manifesto, Anders Breivik talked about the importance of white nationalists using Tor. Earlier this month, there was one day when the most shared link among ISIS-affiliated Twitter accounts was instructions about how to download the Tor browser. This is stuff that these people find natural. So, what does this what does this mean? What does this mean for security services? And that's what I'm going to spend I've only got about 7 minutes or so, the next 7 minutes trying to talk through. I don't have the clear solutions to these problems, but I've got a couple of ideas about where I think it might be going. Firstly, I think it's going to presage a return to something more like old-fashioned human intelligence security work. That's going to require new types of skills, new types of people, new types of informants, of course. But I think that both the public popularity of and the efficacy of large bulk data collection, trying to spot patterns within that type of data, is increasingly going to be not the way that intelligence or security services or policing will be able to work, both for reasons of public perception and for reasons of efficacy. Back in the early 60s and 70s, Soviet ciphers were too strong for GCHQ to break. And so what did GCHQ do? Well, you can't just simply stand aside and do nothing, so you recruit more insider agents. And I think we'll see something happening like that today. Now, this is the problem. This is the problem. It's more morally hazardous. It's more intrusive, this type of surveillance work. So what does that mean? That means greater public acceptability and understanding about what it is that our security services do and how they go about doing it. And I think as intelligence work becomes, as inevitably it will, more complex, more difficult, and in some cases always outside of the gaze of the public, those mechanisms of oversight and scrutiny are going to become increasingly more important for guaranteeing at least some degree, a sufficient degree of public trust and confidence. And I'm not convinced at the moment that the mechanisms in place are sufficient to do that. I would love to see, I'm not sure whether it's possible, but I would love to see more public involvement, more citizen involvement in the oversight mechanisms in our security services. We need to find a way that can command some degree of public trust with what I think is going to become an increasingly intrusive but more targeted type of surveillance. Because this is the danger. This is the danger. On the one hand, you have the perception that the intelligence agencies and the police are omnipotent. They capture every piece of data that takes place everywhere, anywhere, every swipe and every click. And they make perfect sense of all of that. Now, I've worked in big data analytics, and it's really not that easy. Not only do I think they're not doing it, I think even once they do it, if they do, it's really quite difficult to make sense of that. But you have a perception that they're omnipotent. And yet at the same time, you're going to have a growing number of people that I think will find ways around that. And it's more or less impossible, and we've seen this recently, it's more or less impossible to stop lone wolf attacks. And then the frustrating thing about that is that everybody now leaves a data trail behind them. So increasingly, you're going to have lone wolf attacks. You can then piece together retrospectively that individual's journey, that individual's posts, and people will be saying, well, why on earth didn't you stop it? Look at what he or she was posting for the last few weeks. It was obvious. Well, it's always obvious to retrospectively predict something. And you'll recall the sort of, I always found it rather bizarre, the combination of during the riots we had the public saying, why on earth is the police not monitoring Twitter? And now I feel like we have, why on earth is the police monitoring Twitter? And the combination of a belief in this omnipotence of the security services with the inevitability of attacks, combined with the fact that those attacks will always leave a data trail that can be retrospectively fitted, could create almost the opposite of what you want, the perception of intelligence services that are everywhere and yet incompetent. Was really, you want to create something more akin to the opposite of that. That's why mechanisms of oversight, I think, are going to become so important. Secondly, you may need to rethink how resources are allocated. And we heard it last week from the National Crime Agency. Every government in the world, of course, says they want to remove illegal images of children from the internet, and we all do. I'm afraid I don't think it's possible to do that. So what do? Well, you probably begin to focus your resource on the most serious cases, on the most serious criminals. That's a very hard political sell to make. But I think we are going to have to begin to do that. And I think it's going to be a combination of making sure people feel they can't get away with stuff scot-free, and actually focusing resources on the most serious criminals, whether it's the drugs marketplaces, whether it's illegal images of children, whether it's hate speech online, because frankly the police are sort of overwhelmed with complaints about cyber stalking and all the rest of it. We need to find a new settlement which allows us to focus more on the serious cases. And finally, possibly, working with people that you ordinarily wouldn't really like. That's nothing new for security services, of course. But in places like Tor Hidden Services, you will find some unlikely allies who will also, libertarian though they may be, also do not want to see child trafficking, child abuse images on Tor Hidden Services in the darknet. And they don't want to have their space, their special sacred space, ruined by this. Back last year and the year before indeed, it was the hacktivist collective Anonymous that probably did more than anyone to try to remove child pornography from the darknet. Anonymous recently declared war, I'm not quite sure what that actually means, on ISIS. And I think they could do something quite damaging there. So these are the challenges. These are some of the solutions. None of these questions, I suppose, are particularly new to any of you. None of these moral quandaries are new to any of you. But I think on the darknet, I think we get to see them with a bit more clarity because they are on the fringes, they are at the extremities. And as a result, I think we're forced to think harder about them and how we walk that fine line between privacy and safety. And so I conclude back where I started with that young man, Mazzini, because that scandal that the Home Secretary refused to enter into further discussion about led to an end of the political spying on letters through the post office for 50 years. We don't really have that luxury today. Very soon, so much more of our stuff, our fridge, our house, our cars, are all going to be connected to the internet. I think we're going to have far more distributed social network sites, more people using the darknet, more people using encryption services, and we don't have 50 years to solve these problems because, as I've said, it will be those who have nefarious purposes to hide that will be the earlier adopters. So as we struggle on, perhaps Mazzini himself has that one final lesson for us. Slumber not in the tents of your fathers. The world is advancing, and so advance with it. Thank you very much indeed.